Hello, my name is Morg, and I am a makeup historian. I have wanted to combine my love of cosmetics with my historical education for some time. This experiment in 13th century cosmetic methods is going to be the first in my historical makeup test kitchen. For the purposes of this video, I have chosen 3 cosmetic procedures from the 13th century book De Ornatu Mulierum, or On Women's Cosmetics. I originally found the book translated from Latin to French in a 1967 publication by Pierre Ruel. Unfortunately, this book was impossible to access during COVID restrictions, so I relied on a translation into English, which I found published on medievalist Dr. Martha Carlin of University of Wisconsin-Madison's website. I chose this treatise because it's a good representation of the types of cosmetic procedures which medieval people generally practiced. Often, the medieval era is referred to as the Dark Ages due to the lack of knowledge which was lost in the fall of Rome and the challenges of building a new empire. While it is the opinion of this medievalist that the Dark Ages are generally overstated, it is true that medieval people had some truly strange and often inaccurate and dangerous views on beauty and how it related to health. As such, I had to choose my recipes carefully to avoid rubbing ingredients like quicksilver, what we moderns call mercury, quicklime or lye, which can permanently burn the skin, permanently blind you, and release toxic fumes directly onto my skin. With these unhealthy and dangerous issues acknowledged, there will also be some evidence presented in this video showing the things that medieval people truly got right. Medieval physicians and beauticians, grouped together here because health and beauty procedures often overlapped, were advanced in ways which modern stereotypes about the Middle Ages may not recognize. Today is going to be my first day of preparing for my medieval makeover, and in order to turn my hair from peasant straw into a look fit for a queen, I'm going to have to go out into the fields and collect some willow leaves. So without further ado, I'm going to hop onto my noble steed and we're going to get going.
While having beautiful, and especially long hair, was high on the list of beauty standards for medieval European women, most who had the time to do hair treatments like this one would have worn hair coverings in the 13th century. Covering one's hair was a sign of respect for God and modesty. Still, most women did not cut their hair, and keeping it thick and healthy would be essential for the more complicated hairstyles or hair nests which could be seen in the 15th century. Blonde or light red hair was seen as the most beautiful type, and hair dyes were employed to lighten the hair. In De Ornatu Mulierum, there are recipes for lightening and darkening the hair. Interestingly, the standard of light hair is contrasted by there being a glorification of dark but thin eyebrows. This is what my hair looked like before we attempted to do the medieval hair thickening treatment. So my first recipe is titled For Thick Hair. In order to have thick hair, cook willow leaves, then grind them. Blend with olive oil and spread on your hair. For the purposes of this video, I'm interpreting cooking as boiling because I think that that's what's going to make the leaves soft enough to grind. So I've just got maybe half a cup of boiling water here, and I'm going to add my willow leaves in and cook them until they seem sufficient. Eyebrow plucking, high hairlines, and body hair removal were all signs of class for medieval European women. Women would often singe their body hair or rip hair out using pine resin in a fashion similar to the use of modern waxing strips. Facial injuries from chemical burns related to hair removal were common enough to be noted in other beauty treatises. Quote-unquote bad body hair, usually in the armpits or on women's genitals, was associated with being low class. The hair treatments listed in De Ornatu Mulierum and other similar treatises would not have been practiced by any peasant women, but they were actually in fairly wide use among nobility, even lesser noble women who wanted to appear to be of higher status. Although it's decidedly ahistorical, I have opted to use a blender for the grinding part of this recipe because I couldn't find a reasonably priced mortar and pestle anywhere. So I'm going to add the willow leaves and an unknown quantity of olive oil to my blender since the recipe didn't specify. I'm just trying to make enough that I can coat my hair like it instructs. The treatise I chose to use for this video specifically is credited in part to Trotula of Salerno in the introduction. Trotula could have been the first female physician in Europe, but her works and existence are debated by historians. mostly due to her name being appropriated by male physicians in order to explain their work, and errors in translation and crediting upon the invention of the printing press. The author of the treatise also calls upon several Greek writers and, quote, what I learned at Messina from a Saracen woman, who was a doctor for the people of her faith, end quote.
I just wanted to quickly show the texture of my mixture here, which is very bright green. You can see that it's a little bit stemmy, which I think is accurate since it would have been crushed. I didn't want to blend it too finely. It does actually smell really nice, which is great. And I'm just going to get to applying it in my hair.
Okay, so I'm going to get started on the application process, and I'm basically just going to try to spread this as evenly through my hair as possible. I'm going to allow it to sit in my hair for at least 30 minutes, and then I'm going to wash it out in a bath because I think that that's the most historically accurate way of doing it, would just be some warm water, and I'm just going to try to scrub it out. I'm not going to record any clips of that for obvious reasons, but I'm just going to get started on this. Oh. So it's extremely grainy. We're gonna see what this does.
Back to the question of authorship. While the debate on the existence of Trotula is an issue, plenty of recent research in the medieval medical history canon considers her to have been a real figure teaching at the medical school of Salerno, and she likely did write treatises on health, mostly focused on gynecology and dental hygiene. Most who believe she was real think she lived between 1000 and 1100, with birth and death years being unclear. De Ornatu Mulierum is considered the third section of a complete book by the name of the Trotula. This collection is obviously largely thought to have been written by the woman physician of the same name, but scholars still argue about Trotula's existence and contributions to the medical world. Frequently, in early medieval texts like the ones I examined for beauty recipes, there is no clear author, or the author is miscredited due to translation errors among scribes. Historian John Benton believed that De Ornatu Mulierum may have been written by Ricardus Anglicus, sometimes also known as Richard of Salerno. This would explain how the author knew so much about Trotula and frequently referenced her discoveries, but also refers to himself as a man in the book. In any case, this treatise is almost certainly related to the medical school of Salerno, and includes the themes and ideas which those who taught at the school shared. The founding of the school is shrouded in mythology, but it is widely thought that the school's position near the Mediterranean Sea made it a crossroads of knowledge between the Arab and European worlds. The school used already existing Arabic, Greek, and Latin texts to build knowledge, but also utilized the knowledge of people returning from crusades or pilgrimages. The information which Christian and Jewish medieval Europeans already had, mixed with this new knowledge, made the school a model for what medicine could be. Regardless of authorship of this particular treatise, hair was a very important part of medieval beauty standards. Hair was often a representation of class, and may actually have been even more important for men than women. In fact, hair length was sometimes even written into law. Peasant men were expected to have their hair cut short above their ears. Noblemen and knights could grow their hair long, and having curly, golden hair was the ultimate sign of class and belonging. Folktales, especially those of Chaucer, often portray peasants achieving the nearly impossible task of class mobility. In these tales, tricking people into believing that they are high class is often achieved through aesthetic changes to the hair's appearance. These changes were frowned upon by elites, who wanted to maintain their status, and saw their birth into nobility as a gift from God. As such, having good hair was essential to class maintenance.
Alright, I think that I'm sufficiently coated now. I look like a greasy bog witch. So I'm going to let this sit in my hair, and hopefully I will come out on the other side a little bit prettier.
This is my hair about 12 hours after washing out my medieval hair thickener. As you can see, it's absolutely disgusting, and I do not recommend trying this at home.
Okay, the next recipe I'm going to be recording is going to be a 13th century teeth whitener, and it's described: if you want to whiten your teeth, take very clean barley flour, fine powdered alum, which I'm using baking powder as a substitute for that because eating alum directly in high concentration is not good for you, and baking powder is going to be a similar derivative of the same chemical types. Heated salt, which I'm going to have to throw in a pan,
and a little bit of melted honey. So we're gonna see how that turns out. This feels exceedingly like something you should not do. Okay, while my salt is heating up, I'm going to add my unspecified amounts of other ingredients yet again. I'm trying not to go for a ton of baking powder, as I'm worried that that's going to taste really awful. I think I'm just going to get rid of some of that. And it just says a little bit of honey. I'm mostly going to try to use this just to bind everything together. And the last thing is my very hot salt. Oh, that's making terrifying noises. All right, let's mix this together.
Medieval dentistry left much to be desired, and although methods for dental cleaning like this one existed, there were still oral hygiene issues which needed to be addressed. Toothaches were regarded as one of the worst types of pain, and little could be done to help a sufferer. Bad teeth were sometimes pulled without any type of painkiller by the local blacksmith. Dramas and art from the era portrayed how intense this pain was, sometimes as a form of comedy and sometimes as a representation of divine punishment. Still, medieval European dental health was decent compared to later periods where sugar was introduced to the European diet. Hard, grainy breads with peas or beans occasionally added made up a large part of most peasants' diets. They were limited to eating what they could grow on their land, mostly grains and vegetables. Ironically, nobility would often not eat vegetables, thinking they were an unhealthy, poor person's food. In spite of this, the absence of sugar and consuming mostly whole foods without modern chemical processing made for decent teeth. This is the texture of my finalized medieval toothpaste. Surprisingly, it's somewhat close to the gooey texture of modern toothpaste. Here are my teeth before applying the whitener. Here I'm using Trotula's recommended method to brush your teeth, using a paste, usually with some combination of herbs and an abrasive agent like salt, wrapped in wool and linen to rub the teeth clean. I ended up using a linen pillowcase because it was what was most easily accessible to me, and I just put my medieval toothpaste inside of it and rubbed my teeth clean. Back to the complications of medieval dentistry, dental pain was often wrongly thought to be caused by a parasitic worm. At Salerno, this was thought to be treatable by fumigation of the mouth with vapors from henbane, a narcotic which is similar to belladonna. In less extreme cases, like my more minor case of teeth yellowing from graduate student coffee addiction, toothpaste were used to treat discoloration, bad breath, or plaque buildup. Having breath which smelled nice was another medieval beauty standard, this time closer to what we value today. Depictions of beautiful women in medieval folktales often say they have breath which smells of roses or incense. I ended up using my medieval tooth whitener a total of 3 times, and I would say that it actually was a success, making my teeth slightly whiter and definitely clean.
My last recipe is actually going to be the simplest because there is really only one ingredient, and that is very pure wheat, which I ordered off of a website for brewing beer because it was one of the only places where I could get it that wasn't in a ridiculous amount of bulk. So all I have to do is add this to some water and then let it sit for 15 days, and then we can move on to the next step.
Beautiful women in the medieval era were expected to have milky or ivory skin. The ability to stay out of the sun was a signifier of social class, once again. Whiteness was associated with purity, and medieval art often depicts women with very light skin, contrasting with bright eyes and pink lips.
So my wheat has been soaking in its water for 15 days, and the next step is going to be to grind and blend it in the water. Then we're going to strain it through a cloth and let it evaporate so that we get a crystallized powder, which is supposed to be white. So we're just going to start by blending it all up.
While I prepare my final recipe, I wanted to talk about some of the conclusions that I came to while researching for this video. First, I will start with a description for the purpose of writing this treatise according to the author. They write, quote, "When God had created the woman from Adam's rib, he gave her an imperishable beauty, but she lost it because of the devil after she had tasted the apple. She was greatly disgraced. So women who live nowadays, who are not guilty of that, have lost a great part of their beauty because of Eve's transgression. Some, for example, when they are young girls, are pink, white, and lovely. As soon as they are married, their colors vanish. Others were never beautiful at any time in their lives. I write this book for you so that you can maintain your beauty and learn how to improve it." Yikes. Anyway, this clarifies how religion was connected to perceptions of health and beauty in the medieval era. The mistakes of Eve are blamed for women losing their beauty. Aging is connected to sin rather than the natural progression of life. Women's bodies were often used as an artistic vessel for portraying sin. Somewhat regrettably, I had to use my modern blender again in order to get the wheat to a consistency where I could actually squeeze it through my cloth. Here, I'm just separating all of the white water from the actual yucky bits left behind from blending up the wheat. I decided to use the linen cloth again, figuring that if it was usable in the medieval home for a toothbrush, they would probably use it for other things as well, like making this makeup.
Unfortunately, upon evaporation, my wheat turned brown and smelled rancid, so I bailed on my final experiment. Regardless of my failure, the rest of my research conclusions remain the same. As much fun as it is to test these cosmetics now, it needs to be said that at the time this treatise was written, cosmetic use was frowned upon by many who saw artificial enhancement of beauty as sinful. At the same time, women were held to an aesthetic standard which was impossible to achieve naturally. Having a high hairline, thin eyebrows, pale skin, light hair, rosy cheeks, a hairless body, and incense breath are ridiculous expectations, even with today's technological and chemical advances to cosmetics. Class was clearly connected to cosmetic use and access. This is obvious, but more interestingly, the reasons for cosmetic use were also for performing class. Paleness, especially, is a beauty standard which would have been impossible for women who worked outdoors to achieve. My white makeup, had it worked, could have worked as a type of class camouflage. This would be an issue for nobility, interested in maintaining the rigid class system. The association of ugliness or aging with sin also would have made artificial beauty seem deceitful. Perhaps not much has changed in the double standard of desiring natural beauty while simultaneously shaming women's natural bodies. Some other things remaining the same are cosmetic ingredients. The baking soda in my 13th century toothpaste is still used in some toothpaste and deodorants. Olive oil, in smaller quantities than what I soaked my hair with, does work well as a skin and hair moisturizer. And finally, rosehip oil, which would have been used in my white makeup had I succeeded, is still in many of my modern personal beauty products. Well, that's all for my 13th century makeover. I hope you enjoyed seeing the outcomes of my experiments, and if you want more information, my bibliography will be posted on my website.